Hello everyone, I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath, let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight. Let's begin. I'm a summer camp lifeguard and someone wants me to drown the kids. The town of Spectral Lakes, Washington is known for the glut of ghost stories choking the annals of our history. You can't enter a single gift shop, motel, or museum without gaudy flyers advertising our ghost tours being shoved into your periphery on every kiosk. Most of the stories are relegated to Lake Spectral, the biggest of the town's lakes. But I've always felt a much deeper connection to Lullaby Lake, mostly because my Uncle Chung Ho, all names in this story changed for privacy, ran the summer camp there, and I lived near it for my whole childhood. But after my brother was born, Dad got a job in Seattle and we moved away for a while, only returning after I was 16. The small town now thoroughly bored me. Staying at home wasn't an option. Dad was always at work and Mom moved back to Korea. So having nothing better to do, my brother Ken was like a little gnat hovering around my head, always asking me stupid questions or just generally invading my personal space. I needed a summer job and the local haunted roller rink wasn't hiring. Uncle Chung Ho threw me a lifeline though, offered to let me be a lifeguard for the late afternoon shift. Even let me stay in a cabin in the camp so I could be my own man. There were ghost stories about Lullaby, of course. Before I'd moved away, there were rumors floating around school about kids who walked into the lake to find lost toys and then themselves became lost. When thinking back on those stories at the time, I wondered if it was a way to warn kids about the dangers of the lake. Drowning deaths weren't uncommon in a lakeside town. The first few weeks of the job were easy. The kids who grow up around the lakes already know how to swim, so I only really had to worry about the visitors. A couple kids needed help sometimes. Nothing serious took place. A few fights over toys resulted in tears and I had to break up violent water gun battles, but it was a chill experience overall. I even got to spend an almost intoxicating amount of time with the other lifeguard, Bethany, without my kid brother trying to butt in. She was another Spectral Lakes native. Once, when I was on duty, she hung out with me despite her shift being over. I kept fidgeting with my whistle as she talked and scarcely dared to look at her blue-green eyes. "You're lucky you started this year. Last year sucked bad," she said. She pulled at her black ponytail. I watched a couple kids try to climb up on the giant log bobbing against the rope marking off the safe swimming area. They managed to gain holding on the slippery surface before the log slowly rotated, sending the kids laughing and splashing to their doom. "What happened?" I asked. The whistle's lanyard was tight around my fingers. "A kid drowned, snuck in after hours on a dare." She adjusted herself on the wood camp chair. The peeling paint stuck to the bottoms of her forearms. "The morning lifeguard found him. He quit after." "Oh." My finger went white, its circulation cut off. I untangled it from the lanyard. Must have been awful to see. A few kids on the shore were trying to skip rocks but kept throwing them way too close to the swimming area. I blew the whistle and got them to stop. Yeah, he told me the kid must have died the night before, but something was really weird about the body. I took a tentative glance at her. Her eyes looked far off, past the pine trees on the other side of the lake. What? I asked. There were bruises around his ankles. Police said that his feet must have gotten tangled in debris. A mosquito buzzed near her thigh. She didn't seem to notice. But that lifeguard told me they looked more like hand marks. Chung-ho never told me, I said, brows raised. She shrugged. Didn't want to scare you off, Prolly. She smiled at me. It was simple, almost put on in order to lighten the mood. But still, I glanced away from her, cheeks red. It was good that I did. I noticed something. A blur of orange lurked under the water near the border rope. A few brown fingers showed their tips above the surface before sinking down. I jumped from the tower, grasping my rescue buoy and diving into the lake. The water was freezing. I shouldn't have focused on that in such a life or death moment. But I was used to the temperatures of Washington lakes, and this was unusually cold for a summer day. I grabbed at the orange blur before me, fingers closing in on swimsuit material. I got a grip around a small arm with my other hand and dragged it up to the surface. The kid emerged in a huff. I propped her up on the buoy and quickly towed her to land. She hacked up the water in her lungs, thankfully not having enough in there that she needed any more help with. The other kids stopped what they were doing and watched with mouths agape. "Mr. Choi, is she okay?" asked a friend of hers. "Ha! Katie can't swim," jeered one of the asshole kids. Katie's red eyes bloomed with scared tears. "You okay?" I asked. "My Barbie's gone. I dropped her and tried to get her back. She's gone forever." Before a fresh batch of wails erupted from her. I looked down. Could have sworn her ankles looked red too. But before I could get a better look, Bethany descended on her. Waves of comforting words coming from her lips as she put an arm round Katie's shoulder. "Do you want a Sonic popsicle? I got one in the freezer," offered Bethany. Katie wiped at her red eyes and gave a nod as she wheezed. I reported the incident to her parents and my uncle. After what felt like hours of my uncle and I calming down her hysterical mother over the phone, it was twilight on the lake. I went to my little cabin, which wasn't much more than a small bedroom and bath, and slipped out of my swim trunks. "Oh shit," I said as I put my lifeguard gear away. My whistle was missing. It was a cheap little thing, but Uncle Chung-ho was cheap about replacing stuff. I walked back out to the lake to comb the shore for it, but it was getting real dark, and I figured I'd just find it in the morning, so I stopped. After dinner, I settled into bed and felt a wave of exhaustion overtake me. I got a text from Ken about how he ate Takis that day and liked them. For some reason, he kept using my dad's phone to update me on random things. Usually, I'd play gotcha games or something before I slept, but I could barely keep my eyes open, so I just let myself drift off. I felt cold water all around me. My eyes seemed frozen shut, so my body just floated in blackness for a while. I kicked my legs, hoping to get my head above water, but I had no idea where I was going, and there was something wet and slimy curled around my ankle. I screamed in surprise. Even after kicking vigorously, it just stayed firmly in place, as if it had been tied there to anchor me to the lake bed. Lake bed, that was it. It must be a lake plant, and if it was growing from the bed. so the opposite direction would be my ticket out of the water. I tried to calm myself and bend down to pull away the weeds, but knew my breath wasn't going to last much longer. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. The rubbery weed was tough to tear through, and my fingers refused to bend right in the cold. I kept trying to force my eyes to open, but they wouldn't. The darkness grew more oppressive as air leaked from my lungs. I felt around for the body of the weed and pulled myself down it like a reverse climbing rope. The sandy lake bed was under my fingertips. My nails dug into the roots, grains getting stuck under them. I tried planting my feet on the sand and pulling it out, but nothing seemed to work. Things were getting desperate now. The more effort I used, the more breath left my body. The water around me started to feel like a vice, pushing and crushing me inward, even as my nerves numbed. My joints started to refuse my brain's orders. I grew listless, consciousness fading. I began to feel impossible things in my last moments. I thought I could smell my mom's cooking, but it was just water pouring into my nose. I heard her laugh, but it was just bubbles rushing into my ears and bloodstream. In the still waves, my limp body floated for minutes. I thought I was dead, but I still heard a weak heartbeat through it all. Every pulse of blood in my limbs felt like a needle jamming life into a block of ice. Something touched me. It was almost like hair, or one of those sheer fabrics that people use to wrap bouquets. The thing gently washed across my shin, then again at my feet. Then it was gone, and I heard my whistle. I knew it was my whistle because my brother had banged it up and it never sounded quite right after that. But there it was, its sound echoing through the water. And that sound somehow got me to move. I could move. It was impossible, but I could, despite my body being weighed down by the lake's water that now filled it. The weed relaxed, freeing my leg. And next, I finally could open my eyes. It was still extremely dark, but I could make out some of what was around me. I saw the awful weed that had trapped me here. I saw the lake bed scattered with plant life and litter. And at my feet was the most surprising thing, the toy Katie had lost. It was a Barbie doll with a fabric mermaid tail. The fins must have been what brushed me earlier. Her painted face looked up at me, smile wide but eyes sad like she missed her owner. I picked her up. Despite the exceptionally more serious situation I was currently in, I somehow felt like I needed to return her to Katie. She didn't want to be here. The whistle screamed again. I turned my head to face the sound. It came from deeper in the lake. The lake bed curved downward into a darker valley. I decided to follow the whistle. My lungs were full of water and my feet walked on the lake bed like I was a spaceman on the surface of Mars. So clearly this was a dream. Why should I worry about getting to the surface now? May as well see where this goes. I tread through the ice-cold environment. The valley went deeper and deeper through areas the moonlight struggled to pierce. Still I wandered, guided by that eerie sound. To the left I saw an old toy diving ring. To my right a sunk fishing dinghy. I stepped on a broken bottle as I walked, cursing to myself. My words were garbled as bubbles erupted from my mouth. A trail of blood floated up from my heel. Still I kept walking. Soon it was too dark to see. I stopped then. The full brunt of what was happening here was at the edge of crashing down on my psyche. A light was visible in the distance, cold and blue. I walked toward it. I heard the whistle again. It was followed by a choir of whispering laughs. Dark shapes were outlined in the light, man-made structures. I couldn't make them out yet. The Barbie in my hand hadn't changed expression. It was a doll, I told myself. But somehow she looked scared. It's stupid to admit, but I hugged her close to give myself even an ounce of comfort as that blue light grew brighter. Amongst those dark shapes, I thought I saw something white moving, flitting from one shape to the other. I strained my eyes to see more, but my sight, despite the light getting brighter, was blurring more and more. The feeling of drowning began to overtake me again. I clutched the doll as I bent forward. I coughed violently as if trying to hack the whole lake out of my lungs. Darkness pressed in on my vision. The whistle's cry cut off prematurely. The last thing I saw before blackness overtook me was a white face highlighted in blue. I woke up with a lot more coughing. It felt like it took a half hour before I could properly breathe again. My bed was soaked like I'd sweated out all the soda I'd drank yesterday. When I got the chance to look up, I noticed my door was unlocked. I quickly locked it and stumbled to the bathroom. What a terrible night. I shoved my bed sheets into a bag. They really needed to be washed. I walked out of my cabin and headed for the laundry. The lake was as beautiful as ever in the morning light, but I felt a sudden aversion when looking at it that I'd never experienced before. Yawning, I continued down the shoreline in my sandals, which I could hardly feel with how numb my feet were, when a speck of hot pink caught my eye. A mermaid Barbie perched on the sand. Water lapped up at her fins. She smiled, her stiff plastic arms pointed up at the sky. And beside her, almost dissolved amongst the sand, were bloody footprints leading out of the water. I looked down at my foot. Blood had pooled at the bottom of my sandal. I didn't want to go to my shift that day. I used the first aid station to patch up my cut foot, but I kept shivering whenever I caught even a glimpse of the lake now. Of course, I didn't tell Uncle Chung-ho the real reason I didn't want to do it. I just blamed it on my injury. "Well, you can still walk, can't you?" he said to me while I nervously stood in his office. "You can use your eyes? You can swim?" He gave me a look. I shrugged. "I could have used that cabin of yours to store more tubes. Now I gotta keep them in the cafe. You know how hard it is for me to make coffee when there's 50 giant rubber inflatable donuts in there? You said that kids don't want coffee anyway, so the cafe's only needed for the adult camp season." "Yeah, and who in here's an adult?" He gave me another look as he pointedly unscrewed the lid of his thermos and took a long gulp of decaf. He wiped his chin and raised his brows. "The least you can do for me is do your job with a little cut on your foot." Yeah. My eyes fixed themselves on the patchy carpet before I dared to speak the next words. "But, you know, hazard pay would be nice." Chung-ho glared at me with a concentrated power only an uncle could. "Noah, remember what happened right before you moved away?" I shrugged, trying to figure out where this was going. The fancy playground I'd just bought went missing. The whole thing. I got it with a loan I'm still trying to pay off. Now you want to get paid. You don't want me to go bankrupt, do you? I shrugged again, regretting saying anything about getting paid. The memory of that incident came back to me now. On reflection, it was really weird. The whole playground was stolen, the only bits remaining being some leftover screws and wagon wheel tracks that went straight into the lake. police said there was only evidence of a singular thief and that he'd worked through the night disassembling it and bringing the pieces onto a boat. No, Uncle Chung-ho, I don't want that. I was just joking. Jokes should be funny, Noah. I walked out of his office, wincing even as I stepped lightly. Already feeling sufficiently emasculated by the way I'd hugged that doll last night, I was desperate to hide my trembling when I took over Bethany's shift later that day. I failed. "You all right, Noah?" she asked, looking me up and down after she'd descended the lifeguard tower. "It's kinda cold today, huh?" I responded, pressing my shivering hands to my sides. "Not really." Bethany unwrapped a fresh popsicle, which was already dripping. "Princess Seafoam." A sudden squeal mercifully ended the conversation. Katie spotted the Barbie poking out of my tote and immediately gave the doll what would have been a bone-breaking hug if it had been alive. Yeah. I found it on the beach this morning," I said, shifting my weight away from my cut foot. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," said Katie, who jumped up and down. She wore her campground clothes, not her swimsuit. Probably not in the mood to get into Lullaby. I sympathized. "If you hadn't saved her, she was gonna get taken by the weeds," Katie said, shaking her head and petting the doll's hair. "Weeds," I wondered, heart thumping. "What do you mean?" "Lullaby weeds take toys down deep," she said matter-of-factly. "Maybe the lake likes to play with them, I don't know." Before I could ask anything else, she ran off towards her cabin. "Good on ya. That mermaid could have drowned," Bethany said. My shivers ceased as I looked at her warm smile. I climbed up the lifeguard tower with a salute. There were a lot of kids out today, coupled with the fear from last night's dream. It made the job much more stressful than usual. My whistle being gone, I almost lost my voice from yelling so much. My eyes kept darting from kid to kid, trying to make sure every head dipped underwater for a normal amount of time. Bethany decided to stay with me again. I liked the company. But when she talked with me or tried to show me some videos on her phone, I kept my eyes on the water. There was even a moment when she reached up and tugged on my trunks to get my attention, then offered me a Powerpuff Girls popsicle. I just smiled and accepted it without turning my head. It took all my strength to keep this up, but I couldn't let myself get distracted. Whenever I glanced away from the swimmers, my thoughts flashed back to the feeling of water surging up my nostrils and the heaviness that came with waterlogged lungs. I imagined finding the bodies of children floating up to the surface. Shit, there. A kid way out was bobbing his head out of the water silently, barely able to gasp as he desperately whirled his arms. Bethany immediately followed my gaze and leapt to her feet. Before I could move, she said, "I got this. You played the hero yesterday." She grabbed my rescue buoy and made a graceful dive into the water. I called everyone out of the lake. A mass of kids gave disappointed signs and made their way to the shore. In the span of several tense seconds, Bethany swam over to the drowning kid. But before she could reach him, he sank under the water and didn't come back up. Bethany saw him go down and took a deep breath, following after him. Seconds passed, and then more, then more. Something was wrong. I jumped forward, but somehow my trunks had caught fast on a nail head. My body lurched down, the threads broke, and I painfully landed at the base of the lifeguard tower. My shoulder ached. For a second, I wondered if it was dislocated. I spat sand out of my mouth and stumbled to my feet before managing a beeline towards the water. My shoulder crying in protest, I swam as fast as I could to the spot both of them had disappeared. Just before I went down, Bethany breached the water, gasping and sputtering. Her face was awash in fear. "I can't find him!" I pulled goggles over my eyes and dove. Terror sunk its claws into me as the water overtook my head. I tried my best to push it all away as I frantically searched for the boy. He'd been wearing black swim trunks, which were frustratingly hard to spot in the lake. I went deeper until I found the silty bottom. There, in the weeds, a pale face shone between the green strands. Small bubbles of air burbled from its open mouth. Its lips were blue. Muscles aching for air, I tore through the weeds until the boy's small body was free. Propping him under my arm, I propelled myself off of the lake bed and shot towards the surface. The next few minutes were some of the worst of my life. Bethany called for Uncle Chung Ho and the ambulance. While we waited for help, it was up to us to get this kid breathing again. We'd screamed at the kids on the shore to go back to their cabins, but they didn't move, just staring in horror at their friend's blue skin. CPR training forced itself to the front of my mind. All of my energy went into compressions. I didn't want to break the kid's sternum, but the water just wasn't coming out. I sang to myself, using it to keep time on the compressions while calming my own heart from stopping. Every second felt agonizing. His eyes didn't move under his lids. This was my fault. I hadn't been paying enough attention. I was so overtaken by fear that I almost didn't notice when he started coughing. The kid retched out dirty lake water, turning on his side as bile burst from his throat and onto the warm dirt. Seeing the color return to his face, I started to cry. My uncle congratulated me warmly. He was proud I'd saved another kid's life. I felt cold. 2 close calls in a row was too many. Bethany didn't talk much after the kid was handed over to EMTs. I could tell she was in a shock. Probably felt horrible that she had almost let him drown. She went home looking pale. As I got back into my cabin's bed, the sheets now clean and dry, I rubbed my sore shoulder while I waited for the pain meds to kick in. I wondered if it was possible for me to sleep after all that had happened. I slipped out of bed to make sure my door was locked. I stood there for a moment, looked out my windows at the lake. I closed the blinds. My phone buzzed. "Wow, I'm playing Mario now. He's cool. I like the turtles, Ken." How much access did Dad let this kid have to his phone anyway? The rest of my messages were filled with notifications for new events in my gacha games, so I tried to get my mind off of things by playing them a bit. But while my character rode around in search of PNGs to gamble for, I soon slipped out of consciousness, the relaxing music taking me deep into the fathoms below. That blue light again. I saw it before me. I was back under the waves, toes dug into the sand of the lake bed, standing right where I drifted off the night before. The sudden feeling of water seeping through every nook and cranny of my being flooded my senses. I shuddered, which caused ripples of water to disturb the sand, pushing it back in gentle eddies. The whistle sounded again, much closer. The blue light and blackened shapes beckoned. So I walked towards them, one plodding step at a time. And then the shapes finally crystallized into identifiable architecture. This was a little town. Well, not an actual sunken town. I'd seen pictures of those on the internet before, and they were a lot bigger than this. made up of normal buildings. This was something different. It almost looked like it had been built here, under the water, not flooded. There were several small buildings, some with doorways barely taller than my legs, and all of them were ramshackle, structures made of driftwood hammered together with clumsy hands. The biggest buildings, if you could call them that, were made from the hulls of upside-down boats. A few were modern speedboats and the like, but a lot were much older, like an 1800s logging raft or a fishing dinghy. Doorways were carved out of them, and they were all decorated in some form or fashion. One little hut had tiny shells stuck around the door frame. Smooth, large stones made for tiny pathways between houses. Another structure was lined with fishing nets braided into curious patterns. The bones of various fish stuck out of a boat's hull like a gruesome mohawk. Some of these buildings had large, misshapen, balloon-like things tied to them which floated a distance from the light, so I couldn't make out exactly what they were. Lost toys were placed around as if this was their home. An old porcelain doll covered in lake moss stood at a shop counter as if she was preparing to sell her wares. Her hair floated in a cloud around her, but the lack of a current made it as still as a picture. I saw plastic construction toys near one hut. Broken G.I. Joes stuck in the sand like a battalion ready to shoot me. A chipped tea set with a lake crab curled under a teacup. The source of the blue light was a large old fisherman's lantern, the kind that had been used to ward sailors from the lakeshore at night. It illuminated the centerpiece of the little town, a playground. This was the only piece that wasn't makeshift. It was a whole cost-so playground with a slide and everything that was somehow sunk in the middle of the lake. This was Uncle Chung Ho's. I started when I realized that someone was inside it. Tiny white hands gripped the bars. I couldn't identify the face of their owner. It was wreathed in darkness. A pink beaded bracelet circled one wrist. My heartbeat was in my ears. Water clogged my throat. I tried to speak. No bubbles came forth this time. There wasn't any air left in my lungs to produce them. "Who are..." I managed, but I sounded too garbled to be anywhere understandable. The hands moved. Slowly, they uncurled from the playground bars and slunk back into the gloom. Then, with a kind of unsteady, waving motion, one hand appeared again under the blue light. It held my whistle. I breathed lake water in and out. Each breath was longer and more painful than any on land. I stepped closer to the hand, though every nerve told me to run away. Where would I run to? This was a dream. It had to be. I needed to find out who was haunting it. My fingers touched the ice-cold metal of the whistle. The hand didn't move. I couldn't pull the whistle from its frozen fingers. And the closer I looked at them, the more I could see that they were swollen. The hand pulled itself closer to its body. I was moved with it. A face appeared in the gloom, motes of silt floating about the dead skin. All I could do was watch while bloated, misshapen lips pulled themselves over small teeth as a whispering girl's voice pried itself in the folds of my brain. "Stop saving them." I awoke at the edge of the lake. It was just before dawn. The lake was completely quiet. I stood there for a moment in shock, watching the water crawl up to touch my feet as if beckoning me back down with it. Up and back, up, and in the early morning light it was hard to discern anything. But I started to see little shapes in the waves, gently swaying with the tide, bobbing up and pulling me back. They looked like children's fingers. I staggered back from the shoreline as the full brunt of everything I'd been through hit me. I threw up silty water, my stomach's contents making a mess of the beach chairs beside my cabin. Son of a bitch, I said between retches. All the water was finally out of my body, but I still felt the slimy pond algae mucking up my throat and nose. I retreated into my cabin and drank a few cans of soda to try and wash it down, then gargled a bottle of mouthwash. I showered and scrubbed every last part of myself I could find. I still felt nasty inside. I sensed silt inside the crannies of my bloodstream, sand in between the joints of my bones. It was like the lake itself had infected me, totally. I sat in the corner of my room next to my heater, my blanket pulled over my shivering body. Nothing warmed me up. The hands of the clock ticked by. Lunchtime was coming soon. The first group would be heading to the lake for free time after they ate, where Bethany would watch them. I thought of the whispered words I'd heard last night and burst out of my cabin, heading for my uncle's office. It took several lies to get him to shut down swimming that day. I insisted I'd seen teenagers sneak onto the property and throw used needles onto the beach. I also reasoned it was a good idea to keep the kids out of the water for now, out of respect for the incidents yesterday. My uncle agreed and announced the news over the PA system to the disappointment of the kids. He was impressed with my maturity, he said. I didn't feel noble, just scared. Uncle told me he'd ask the janitors to take care of things when they came tonight. Didn't know what I'd say to him when they didn't find anything. How would I keep this up for even a few more days? Would I have to pollute the lake myself? I said my goodbyes and started back to my cabin. On the way, I saw Bethany walk away from the lake dressed in her lifeguard swimsuit and a pair of sweatpants. I caught her eye and she sidled up to me. Bummer about the lake. We're still gonna get paid, right? She asked. You are. I get paid with food and shelter. Is that legal? According to Choi family law. She chuckled, but I could tell her heart wasn't in it. She looked distracted. By the way, since you're not doing anything right now, I stood up straight, my fingers tangling up with one another. Could you do something for me? What? I need to restock the popsicle freezer. Your uncle doesn't want to bother with it right now. But you've seen how much the kids like it. I mean, a dessert freezer right by the lake. It's just so perfect, right, Noah? I gave a half smile. Is this request really for the kids or just you? Come on, I'll pay you back. She grinned. Chung-ho wants me to stay on site even if I'm not working. I didn't have a reason to stay at the camp anyway. The kids wouldn't be swimming. Plus, getting away from it felt like a good idea, if only to try and stay sane. No excuses, I suppose. All right, I'll be back later, Bethany beamed. Cool, and make sure to get SpongeBob ones. Aye, aye, Captain. I didn't have a car, but Spectral Lakes was small, so walking wasn't a challenge. But my foot still ached, and it took about a half hour to get to the nearest crummy corner store. I leisurely scanned the shelves looking for ugly cartoon popsicles. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out and glanced at the screen. See you soon, Ken. My head tilted in confusion. What did he mean? I didn't remember plans for him to come to the camp today. Might have been a mistake, or an old text that finally went through. I picked out a bunch of popsicles and swept them into my basket. I then was faced with the dilemma of how I was going to keep them from melting in the long walk back. I added a bundle of ice to the order, then a cooler, then despaired at the state of my finances. That's when another text came. Not here. Oh well, Beth is watching me, Ken. Okay, so that first text wasn't a mistake. Something about this made me start to feel nervous. My brother was at camp being watched specifically by a lifeguard, not one of the counselors. I didn't like the sound of that. Did my dad drop him off with my uncle? If so, he wouldn't be swimming today, right? Even if Bethany was watching him, she knew the lake was closed. She wouldn't break the rules. I tried to shake off my anxiety, but it wouldn't go. The shivering feeling from yesterday started again. I had to go back. Now I left my filled-up basket at the door to the chagrin of the shopkeeper and ran down the road towards the camp. Why was it so far away? As I sprinted, the cut on my foot opened up again. My footsteps trailed blood as I went, but I didn't care. My panic was rising and drowning out every other feeling. One car stopped when it saw me, and a concerned woman poked her head out the window asking if I was okay. I managed to convince her to drive me to the camp, insisting it was an emergency. She nodded, shocked, and we drove the remaining 5 minutes. She asked if she needed to call 911, but I told her it was a family matter. I made a beeline for the lakeside. My head swiveled around like an owl as I tried to find Ken. I didn't see him or Bethany anywhere. My trembling fingers tried to type on my phone. Ken, where are you? My dad texted back. I dropped him off with your friend Bethany. They're going for a swim. My heart dropped. I looked out on the water. The swimming area was empty save for a single toy floating on the surface. Ken's boat. I waded into the water. This was something I'd done the past few nights, even if I hadn't been conscious of it. I knew where Ken was. I had to go get him. My fingers pierced the water as I dove. I went deeper and deeper, pressure popping my ears. The lake that was inside me felt like it responded to being back in the water. Currents carried me to the lake bed. Air bubbled out of me. The lake took over and darkness encompassed my mind. I stood where I'd appeared last night, a good distance away from the underwater town. The blue light remained there like a star in the deep lake. I charged forward through the muck, my steps disturbing the silt and flinging it up into the stillness. I thought I could hear something in the town ahead, a choir of whispers, a giggle. My muscles strained against the pressure as I urged them to go faster. I almost stepped on that broken bottle again. Biting my lip, I picked it up and hid it behind my back. As the forms of the little buildings finally came into focus, I saw something that made my blood run even colder. In front of the sunken playground was Bethany. She had a smile on her face and sat cross-legged on the lake bed. A teacup touched her lips as she mimed drinking from it. Her eyes looked almost glazed over. It was horrifying, but the thing she played with was even more so. Across from Bethany sat the corpse of a little girl. It was wrapped in lakeweed, which drifted about her swollen white face like tendrils of living hair. Her eyes were gone, picked clean by lake scavengers. Flesh sloughed off of her body like smeared dough. What was left of her mouth pulled into a mockery of a smile. A giggle traveled through the water as her adipose hair-laced hands poured tea into Bethany's cup. "Where's Ken?" I screamed at the two of them as best I could. Somehow my words carried in the water despite my empty lungs. It almost felt like the lake itself carried my intention. Bethany and the corpses' heads turned to face me, wreathed in cold blue light. "He's not ready to play yet," Bethany said. She stood up and placed herself in front of the corpse protectively. "Bethany, what are you doing?" She was quiet. "I need my brother. Where is he?" I yelled. Bethany's ponytail spread out around her head in the gloom. It almost looked like a dark halo. "My sister is lonely," she said simply. For the first time, I noticed, even through the layers of decomposition, that her and the corpse shared several traits: the black hair, the sharp brows, and matching beaded bracelets. "How long has she been down here?" I whispered. The corpse's vacant eye sockets stared at me. "We're twins," was all Bethany said. I thought I could feel tears on my face, but the only indication of their existence was a bit of salt in the thousands of gallons of fresh water around me. "Please, where's Ken?" I begged. "He's staying. He doesn't want to leave. It's nice here." Bethany's face was still. "Why don't you stay and keep her company?" I yelled. "Keep my brother out of it." Bethany didn't answer. Instead, the piercing whisper of the corpse's words dug into my brain. "She brings me new friends." The sentence sent a violent shiver down my spine. In the shadowy doorways of the huts, I glimpsed the wavering, twisting forms of other small bodies, watching me. There was a boy with weeds tangling his feet. He carried the handles of a jump rope. A girl with a fish darting between her empty ribs slowly pushed a toy car back and forth. The balloons I thought I'd seen last night weren't that at all. The bodies of more children were there, floating upside down with weeds around their necks like a hanging scene from the lake's reflection. They drifted in the water, whispered to one another, used the weed to pull themselves downward to the lake bed like I'd done the first night I'd been drowned. They moved silently, all drawing closer to me while hugging toys desperately to their chests as if those were the last bits of humanity left to them. The freshest body was a boy with a campground wristband on his arm. I couldn't move, or even think. That's when I heard a whistle blow. I looked around for the source of the noise. It came from the largest hut made from the hull of a wooden boat. I moved past Bethany, who grabbed my wrist and pulled me to face her. "It's too late," she said. "Go home, Noah. Live. I like you." Her pale face moved closer to mine. Cold fingers touched my chin. Numb lips closed over my own. I wrenched out of her grasp, squeezing so hard on her wrist that I heard a crack resound in the darkness. She cried out and fell to her knees. I didn't look back, charging into the large hut and gasping at the sight within. Ken lay on a bed of weeds. He was still, eyes bleary, but I could see a whistle tucked between his teeth. I hovered over him, my face twisted in pain, looking for any sign of life. In the perfect stillness of the lake bottom, there were only two things I could hear: my own heartbeat and Ken's. I hugged him, then propped him up against my side and swam out of the boat. Tens of dead eyes watched us. I quickly swam up, kicking my legs as fast as they would go. Hundreds of little fingers closed in around my vision. I swam harder and harder. The water filling me weighed me down, but my heart gave life, if even a little, and I just outpaced the corpses. That's when I felt the weeds begin to wrap themselves around us. The girl's whisper slunk into my thoughts. "Please don't go." I wielded the broken bottle like a hunted cat swipes its claws. The glass tore away at the weeds one after the other. In my desperation, I cut my own legs, but it was worth it as we broke free and kept traveling upward. Noah. Bethany's fingers closed around my ankle. I cut them too. I only glanced behind me for a second, but in that glimpse I saw Bethany reach out for me again and miss, desperately trying to reach us even as her wrist flopped at her side and blood bloomed from her other hand. Her face was twisted in pain and fear. When the corpses realized that their intended prey was escaping their grasp, they instead moved to the easier prey. They needed someone to stay with them. All I heard was a gurgling scream slowly fading away behind me as I swam up. My brother and I burst from the surface of the lake. We were a good distance from shore, and it took some time for me to finally propel us onto it. The entire time we got lighter and lighter as we coughed out the lake. As soon as we touched the dirt, we crawled as far as we could manage before rolling onto our backs, gulping down the precious pine-scented air. The sight of the sunlight, no longer filtered through cold water, warmed my shivering body. I turned to look at Ken, who, I could tell, felt the same. He started to cry, and I hugged him. I patted his back to help him out as the remnants of the depths dribbled from his mouth. Flashbacks of when I burped him as a baby came to mind. That protective feeling of holding my newborn brother mirrored my current emotions as clearly as the reflections on the lake's surface. Thank God, I said into his hair as I held him close. He started to try and speak. I found your whistle. I know, you did good. I knew it was yours because I broke it. Yeah, that's okay. I didn't want to be down there. I know, you're out now, you'll be okay. They didn't have tackies down there. I think it would have sucked. I laughed. Yeah, buddy, you're right. All I told Uncle Chung Ho the next day was that I was bored of the job and needed something that paid. He grumbled about it, but I was let off the hook. Though he did ask me a few times if I knew where Bethany went. She wouldn't answer his calls. I told him I hadn't heard from her either. There was an investigation to find her, but nothing ever came up in the years that followed. Ken doesn't swim anymore, but besides that, he bounced back from what happened really well. He even started getting real good at biking. Resilience of youth, I guess. I'm in college now and decided to study in Korea. Stay with my mom and her family for a while. Even now I can feel the lake when I'm across the world. I can sense the eddies of the sand move in the ripples of water. I listen to the lapping against the shoreline. Bethany's laugh when she plays with her sister. Sometimes I can hear when Ken throws old toys into Lake Lullaby. He hopes it likes them. Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. Lump. I was 21 years old on the day of Mother's funeral. A milestone day that was usually spent with friends, drinking yourself into a stupor. For me, it was a day of sitting in a small, dank room with Mother's coffin on a pedestal, surrounded by empty chairs. The funeral home director would have some of their employees attend the funeral if no guests showed up, which seemed like a good idea when it was first presented. However, seeing them shuffle in and sit emotionless in the back of the room filled me with a sense of shame. The thought that the only people other than myself who would attend her funeral did so out of obligation was too much to bear. I asked the director to send them away, and they left without a moment's hesitation. most likely returning to their own friends and families where they would live and never give that poor, lonely woman another thought. I couldn't blame them, though. Mother wasn't the type of woman who wanted to be remembered. She had spent most of her life in isolation due to a deep-seated distrust of people, a belief that had taken root shortly after I was born. It had something to do with a man showing up at our doorstep when I was still a baby and causing a scene. She never liked to go into details about the incident and would quickly change the subject. I once asked her if the man was my father. Her face turned red and she screamed at me to go to my room. That was the last time I ever asked about the man or my father. I was 7. My name is Colin, but Mother always called me Lump, a nickname I acquired when I was still in school before I was pulled out and placed in a homeschooling program. A group of older kids in 1st or 2nd grade picked on me mercilessly and would call me Lump until I cried. I was born with a lump on the side of my stomach about the size of a softball. It posed no health issues, and Mother constantly told me that we didn't have the money to have it removed. So I lived with it and suffered the consequences of an uncaring healthcare system combined with the cruelty of children. But Mother did her best to help me feel better about it all. "They're just jealous," she said from the front seat of our old station wagon. She opened the glove box for tissues and handed one back to me. "Dry those eyes, sweetie. They're jealous because the lump you have, the lump you want gone so badly, reminds them that they aren't loved as much as you are." "Why?" I asked through sniffles and a tissue. "Well, I never told you this before, but what's in that lump of yours is all the love I have for you. Before you were born, I loved you so much that it all gathered together in that lump." "Gross," I screamed with a smile. "Not gross at all. Now, no matter where I am and where you are, you'll have a bit of my love with you right there by your side in that lump." "Okay." She looked up into the rearview mirror to glance back at me. "I had a love lump once too. It was you, and now here you are. My little lump," she said with that silly baby voice that always made me laugh. We giggled about that the entire way home, and from then on I was called Lump. I was glad that she loved me because I didn't seem to find much affection at school. I never got close to any of my classmates, and I rarely had friends who stuck around for more than a week or two. I may have moved on and accepted my new nickname, but that didn't mean the bullying had stopped. If anything, it had gotten much worse. Mother took me out of school once she found out that someone had taken a picture of me shirtless in the locker room. The picture was discovered when some boys got into a fight over who would get to keep the photo next. The fight got pretty rowdy, and one of them ended up breaking the other's arm. Once we found out that the boys had just been suspended and that the matter was considered settled, Mother flipped out. She didn't care that I was halfway through 1st grade and dragged me out. "I will not have my boy paraded around as a freak," she shouted as she pulled me by my arm through the school parking lot. She stopped at the principal's parking spot and spat on his car. She looked back at the brick building where the principal, students, and teachers stood watching us through the window. "Fuck you," she screamed. "You should all feel ashamed." She switched to working nights, and during the day, between naps, she made sure I was doing my schoolwork. She wasn't a great teacher, but she was patient and gave me all the attention she could. She worked herself ragged to take care of me, and that effort took a toll on her. I think she aged quicker than most people, primarily due to the stress of taking care of me on her own. Her fear of me being harmed in some way grew and grew. We spent most of our free time indoors, venturing out only to the grocery store or to the backyard, but we rarely did much more than that. The isolation made it impossible for either of us to make or have friends. She played with me whenever I asked, and for a time I thought that was enough. We fought constantly about my desire to leave the tiny world she had created for us. I called it a prison and she called it our home. I wanted to travel and explore while she wanted to stay and wait. It wasn't until many years later that I began to realize just how deep her loneliness must have been. People are not meant to be alone, and when she died, that was a truth I learned very quickly. I attempted to carry on with my life as I had when she was alive, but the house was too quiet. Every creak and moan the house made reminded me of just how alone I was. Sitting at the dinner table and looking at her empty chair would cause me to weep. Not because I missed her, although I did, but I cried because I was alone. Truly alone. The first bit of happiness I experienced after her passing came when I learned that she had left me a sizable inheritance. I had grown up believing we were relatively poor, barely scraping by. She had been very smart with her money. A few extremely lucky investments and her decision to live a budget-friendly life resulted in a small, tidy sum of money. It was a settlement she received from the incident with the man arriving at our house when I was a baby. He was the doctor who delivered me when I was born. Something in him had snapped, and the hospital paid Mother a hefty sum to smooth things over and to avoid bad press. It wasn't enough for me to retire on, but it was sufficient enough that I wouldn't have to work much, and I wouldn't need to worry about that for a long time. The news felt like an anvil being lifted off my chest. After a while, the joy turned bitter when I'd reach down and feel the lump in my side, wondering why she had lied all those years. Why would she claim that we couldn't afford to have this growth removed? I had learned to accept it as part of me, but even so, being able to live my life without it would have brought some sense of normalcy to what had been, for the most part, a normal childhood. I was 21 now, 21 and ready to spend Mother's money on my surgery. I was prepared to begin living my life the way I wanted, a life of discovery and without fear. I would get the lump removed. I sat on a cushioned table in the doctor's office, the paper sheet crinkled beneath my bare bottom. This was all unfamiliar to me. I hadn't been to a doctor's office in decades, not since I was a baby. When the nurse handed me the gown, I had to ask her what I was supposed to do with it. She scrunched her eyebrows at me. "You get undressed and put this on." I began to unbutton my pants. "Wait until I leave first," she said abruptly. My face felt like it was on fire with embarrassment. It was my first time at the doctor's office, and I had almost accidentally shown my dinky to the nurse. She was pretty. The thought of her nearly seeing my dinky caused it to stir. I quickly tried to calm myself down while she was gone, thinking she might be back at any moment. The last thing I wanted to do was to show her my privates. Mother always said that was a sacred right that a beautiful soul had to earn. I sat there for 2 hours, The clock on the wall taunted me with each tick. By the time the doctor came in, my legs were numb and tingly. I jumped down from the table to shake his hand, but my legs almost gave way. I caught myself with a stumble and kept my hand out for him to shake. He looked at me with a puzzled expression and ignored my outstretched hand. Instead, he snapped a latex glove over his fingers and onto his wrist. "So let's take a look at this, His voice trailed off. He picked up his clipboard briefly and set it back down. "Lump," he said finally. He plopped down onto a short rolling stool and cleared his throat. With that, I pulled the gown to the side so he could see. He was old, older than Mother had ever been. His hair was still blonde, though, and it fell in small, tight curls across his forehead. His face was unshaven and his breath stank even though his teeth were unnaturally white. His glasses sat on the tip of his nose as he stared at my side. "Interesting," he said quietly. He sat up straight and rolled back toward a machine before wheeling back with it. "What is this?" I asked. "This," he said as he squirted a gel onto the tip of the wand, "this is an ultrasound." He placed the wand on the lump and the coldness caused me to recoil slightly. "It's going to be cold," he said, slightly annoyed. "What does it do?" I asked. He licked his lips and then pursed them together as he looked up at me. "It lets us see what's in there," he said as he pointed up to the screen. "Look up here at the screen. Whatever is in there, we'll be able to see it in here." He moved the wand around as he stared at the screen. I couldn't make heads or tails of what I was looking at. "It's not a tumor, if that's what you're thinking," he said matter-of-factly. His eyes suddenly widened. He turned his gaze to meet mine before looking back at the screen. He reached up and turned the screen so I could no longer see it. "What is it?" I asked. "Shh." He continued to rub the wand on me for nearly 30 minutes without saying a word. Anytime I spoke, he simply shushed me. A knock on the door finally managed to break his trance. The pretty nurse from before poked her head in and asked him if everything was all right. "It's fine," he said hurriedly. He reached for the ultrasound and quickly pressed a few buttons. "Just getting a few pictures for this young man's files." She began to leave when the doctor called back to her. "Nurse, these are printing out on printer 3. That idiot in IT still hasn't fixed this damn thing. Be a dear and grab them off the printer and put these in his files." The cute freckles across her nose and cheek shifted as she scrunched her nose in annoyance. It was clear to everyone save the doctor that she did not like being called dear, and she did not like this man. She left and closed the door behind her. The doctor looked at me and then back at the lump. I chuckled. Mother always told me my lump was filled with her love. She said it was my love lump. The doctor did not chuckle. "Well, that's just a load of horse shit," he quipped as he rolled back toward the counter. He grabbed a pen and began writing. "It's nothing at all. Just a type of cyst, easy enough to eliminate with medication. I want you to take 2 of these for a week. That's 1 in the morning and 1 at night. Now say it back to me." "Repeat it back to me so I know that you're paying attention. What do I need you to do with this medication?" "Oh, take 1 in the morning and then take 1 at night." He handed me the prescription, and as soon as my fingers touched it, he pulled it back. "Take it with food," he said sternly. "Okay, twice a day with food, I've got it." and come back to see me in a week. You should see a significant decrease by then. Do you have any questions for me? He asked. I've had this for a really long time and Perfect, he said, cutting me off. Well, if that's everything, then I'll see you in a week. He jumped to his feet and left me with my prescription. I pulled on my clothes, took the bus to the pharmacy, and got my pills. I got back home and poured them out of the bottle and onto the table. 14 pills. That's all it would take to erase this thing from my life. All it would have ever taken to have given me a better childhood. It was hard not to be mad at Mother. It felt unfair that she wouldn't be alive right now while I'm discovering this. That she's not here for me to scream at. That she wouldn't have to see me stomp my feet and smash the dishes felt unfair. There was a lack of just in the though that she wouldn't have to clean up after the mess I made. She wasn't there for any of that, but I did it anyway. I shouted until my voice went hoarse and there were no more things to throw across the kitchen. I scooped up my first pill and swallowed it after dipping my lips under the faucet. I should have saved at least 1 cup to drink them down with, but my anger hadn't allowed me the opportunity to think about the future. I cleaned up the mess as best I could and went to bed. It had been 2 days since I started taking the medicine when I began to notice that my lump seemed to be growing. Occasionally I felt a pain in my side. It was as if something in my gut was pressing against my insides and slithering around. It was enough to make my hair stand on end, so I reached out to the doctor's office to schedule an appointment. 3 days later, I was able to see my doctor. By this time, there was no doubt in my mind that the lump had grown. What was once the size of my fist was now easily twice as large. It weighed heavily on my side and pulled the skin taut. But it no longer hurt, and I no longer noticed the slithering I had felt the day before. I didn't have time to sit down once I entered the office. As soon as I told the woman at the front desk that I was there for my appointment, a nurse came through a door in the back and asked me to follow her. I followed her to the same room I had waited in just a few days earlier. Upon entering, I noticed a change in the room since my last visit. There in the corner sat the doctor. He jumped to his feet and reached out his arm, beckoning me to take a seat. "Please, please," he said quickly as he ushered me toward the already reclined patient's table. "Have a seat." As I sat down, he whipped out the ultrasound machine and abruptly reached for my shirt, beginning to pull it up. I swatted his hand away. "Hey, slow down," I snapped at him. "I don't have all day, young man. Now let me do my job and see what we've got here." His eyes refused to wander. The doctor's gaze was fixed firmly on the lump beneath my shirt. He seemed out of breath as he began to lightly pant. The stench emanating from between his teeth and gums drifted into my nose. It's better to just get this over with quickly, I thought to myself. I reluctantly brought my fingers down to the hem of my shirt and lifted it. As soon as the lump emerged, the doctor let out an audible gasp. His eyes widened as he stared at my side. He lifted his old wrinkled hand and gently let a finger caress my side. "So what's the issue? Why is it growing?" I asked. The sound of my voice in the quiet office startled the doctor out of his stupor. He grabbed the ultrasound and began applying the clear jelly to it. He pressed it to my side again, and I was once more startled by how cold it was. He rubbed the wand back and forth, staring at the monitor. This continued for several moments, with only the sound of his hot, rank breathing breaking the silence. "Well, there's nothing wrong with it," he said faintly, the wand still moving back and forth. "That doesn't make any sense," I said with a tinge of irritation as I grabbed the side of the monitor to pull it into view. "No!" he shouted. The sound of his booming voice coming from his withered old body made me jump, and I let go of the monitor. It's grown so much since I started taking the medicine. "Haven't you ever heard the saying that it needs to get worse before it gets better?" he said through gritted teeth. "Thank you, Doctor. I really appreciate your help." I jumped down from the table. But I think I'm going to see about getting a second opinion about this." My eyes drifted to the ground. I could feel his eyes burning a hole through my forehead, and the air in the room felt thick from the tension. "They'll tell you the same thing I did, boy," he growled. "I've been practicing medicine since before you were born. It's nothing personal. I just want to explore my options." I dashed out the door and briskly walked down the hallway towards the exit. The doctor slammed the door open hard enough that it shook the walls. He stomped out of the examination room. He was frail and old. I could easily outrun him, but his voice proved to be more challenging to escape. "You petulant piece of shit, get back here!" His shouts followed me down the hallway and out of the building. I could faintly hear him from outside, and I sprinted towards the nearest bus stop a few blocks away. I arrived just as the bus opened its doors. I climbed the stairs and made my way to a seat, plopped down and slouched in my seat. I knew it was unlikely that the doctor would have followed me this far or this quickly, but I shuddered at the thought that he might spot me riding past and take the opportunity to hurl more insults my way. As I sat slumped down and hiding, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. This had to be the doctor. He was calling me to give me an earful. It rang in my hands as I stared blankly at the screen. There was nothing on earth that would make me answer that call. It finally stopped ringing. I tilted my head back in relief and stared at the gum stuck to the ceiling. Ding! My eyes shot back down. A voicemail. I pressed play and lifted the phone to my ear. What I heard wasn't the doctor. To my surprise, it was a young voice. A woman's voice, kind and gentle. "Hi, I'm a nurse at the Wellspring Clinic. My name is Celeste. I'm calling for Colin, and I just want to say I am so sorry. I just saw and heard how Dr. Richards treated you, and I am so sorry. Please, please call me back when you get an opportunity." Her voice had a soothing quality to it that lulled me into a peace I hadn't felt since Mother was still alive. It brought me comfort, something I thought I would never know again. This was the day my life changed forever. She sat across from me in the dimly lit restaurant Nico's. She chose this place, and it just so happened to be the restaurant that Mother always said she would want for a first date if she were ever to look for another fish in the sea. It seemed fitting now that I could sit in this restaurant on my first ever date, brought here in some roundabout way by Mother. Her voice didn't do her justice when I spoke to her on the phone. She was beautiful. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves across her shoulders. She had just enough freckles speckled across her cheeks and the bridge of her nose to make it impossible to count. She wore a dress. I wouldn't know how to describe it other than to say it was dark blue. She looked perfect in it, and Mother wouldn't have approved. I had foolishly gotten my hopes up that this would be a real date, but she was far too gorgeous to be out with me. I knew the moment I saw her that she had probably suggested this meeting as a way to smooth things over with what had happened at the clinic. I'd be polite, like Mother had told me I should be on a first date. I'd pull her chair out for her. I'd give her the flowers I had brought. I'd pay for her meal. And if I had done everything correctly, I'd be allowed to walk her to her car and give her a hug. My hopes for the hug had walked out the door as this beautiful woman had walked in. I'm so sorry. Again, it's all right, I said as I slathered butter onto my slice of bread and shoved it into my mouth nervously. It's just that he's... She paused while she searched her mind for the words. He's just such a fucking prick all the goddamn time. I stopped chewing the massive bite and stared at her. Sorry, but it's true. I fucking hate the man. I forced down the bite. No, it's okay. It's really not. I have to put up with him every day, and he's always such a sleazy piece of shit. There were all these rumors about him. Stuff about him getting caught in the dark with patient x-rays. Doing what? I asked. You know. She pantomimed, stroking something with a closed fist. I furrowed my brow. I don't know. She let out a massive laugh that turned into a contorted snort. Her sudden outburst startled both me and the others sitting near us. She covered her mouth with her hands and her cheeks immediately blushed. That's funny. You're funny, but nice try. An arm reached over her shoulder and placed a glass down in front of her. A glass of Willamette's Pinot Noir for the lady and for the gentleman. The waiter gently bit his tongue as he set the glass down in front of me. A glass of Welch's grape juice. The food will be out shortly. He turned on his heels and walked off into the sea of dimly lit tables. Anyways, she said, I probably shouldn't be telling you any of this anyway, and it doesn't even matter. He's gone now. Gone? Well, yeah. You don't get to scream at a patient like he did and keep your job. Oh, I feel awful. I didn't want that. I slouched back in my seat and took a sip of my juice. Don't feel bad. It was going to happen sooner or later. You just happened to be the last straw for his career at the clinic. She leaned forward and shot a wink across the table at me. If anything, I should be saying thank you, but I think it's best if we don't even think about him tonight. After all, that's not what we're really here for. No? No. We looked at each other, taking each other in. My heart began to beat faster. I'm sorry, what are we here for? She sat back in her chair and smiled. I thought we'd get to know each other. Who are you? What makes you tick? My vision went hazy, and my ears felt hot as blood rushed through them. My heart was pounding as I began to share my life story. She was just so beautiful, I felt as if I was on the verge of blacking out while talking. My story isn't particularly interesting, but by the time I finished, she was still listening. She seemed genuinely intrigued. She looked across at me, stone-faced. Wow, that was certainly a lot. Yeah, it's been a tough couple of months, she smiled. I think you're doing just fine. I'm really sorry, but I have to be honest with you. Yes, please do. I don't know what I'm doing, I blurted. I've never been on a... I couldn't bring myself to say it. A date? She asked as a sly smirk crossed her lips. Yeah, I said with a heavy sigh. She reached her hand across the table and placed it on top of mine. It's okay, sweetie. I'll help take care of you. The rest of the night was a blur. She introduced me to so many things that night, and it was an amazing evening of firsts for me. She ordered the food and more drinks. I had my first drink of wine. My head was abuzz as I learned about hummus and feta. I learned that there were all sorts of olives, and they were all more delicious than the last. I learned that if you're too loud, the bar will cut you off from drinks. I learned that a hug from a woman other than your mother gives the warmest feeling deep down in your soul. I learned about the softness of lips against your own. I learned about the smell of her shampoo and how the nape of her neck felt against my cheek. I learned how to unbutton a bra and about the peach fuzz on the small of her back. I learned about the weight of her bare breasts as they heaved against my chest. I learned that night what it meant to love. Celeste moved in with me later that week. We were in love. She didn't care that I still slept in my childhood room. She didn't care that I had no prospects for a career. She didn't care about the lump. She seemed to enjoy it. She would tell me often that I should just leave it, that it made me unique, and that she liked that I wasn't anything like the other men she had been with. She'd often reach down and touch it as we made love, and that was fine by me. She had a voracious appetite for lovemaking. It had begun to affect our lives in negative ways. We had yet to unpack all of her belongings, so we lived among towering cardboard boxes of clothes, books, and knickknacks she had brought with her. The house was starting to get dirty as well. Dishes were piling up in the sink, and grime was beginning to accumulate in the bathroom's crevices. The grass in the yard had started to grow unruly, and dirty clothes were piling up in every corner of every room. She took all of her vacation time to spend it at her new home with me, and it was clear what she intended to do, what she called a staycation. It had been 4 weeks now, and it was the most magical time of my life, but I was honestly exhausted, and the fact that I was such a light sleeper didn't make the transition to sharing a bed any easier. One night I had to tell her that I just needed to sleep. I feel like a raisin. She reached down below the sheets, pulled my pajama shirt up with one hand, and thrust the other hand down below to take hold of me. "I'm serious," I said. "Not tonight, please." "At least take off your pajamas," she pleaded. "No." She rolled her eyes. "Fine," she mumbled as she turned away from me. Although I couldn't see her, I could feel how annoyed she was. Her warm body pressed up against mine, but the bed still felt cold. I don't know how long she stewed in annoyance because the exhaustion took hold. I did not drift off to sleep as much as I plummeted into slumber. "Wake up," she whispered loudly into my ear. My eyes shot open as her hot breath pierced into my ear canal. "What? What is it?" "Someone is trying to break in." I bolted upright, throwing back the covers. Late night air was cold against my bare chest. I jumped up and ran to the window. There below I could see the form of a man sneaking around the house, peering into the windows. I grabbed the phone and called the police. The police arrived quickly. It couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 minutes, but in that time I saw the figure weakly attempt to pull open several windows and pick the lock in the door with no luck. The police arrived with flashing lights. They quickly jumped out of the car and began shouting at the figure. The lights silhouetted the figure more clearly, allowing me to see more details. It was now clear that whoever it was had a gun in one hand and a rope in the other. He was hunched over, old and frail. "Holy shit," Celeste said as she pressed her face up against the window. "That's Dr. Richards down there." It was. Clear as day now, in the sharp red and blue light spilling across my front yard. It was the same man who had screamed at me a month ago, bringing Celeste and me together. "I have to get in," he screamed at the police. "Sir, that is not going to be happening tonight. You need to drop the gun." I couldn't see all the details between the strobing lights and the awkward angle from which I was attempting to watch. Just a quick jerking movement from the doctor's arm with the gun, and then a flurry of sparks and deafening bangs from the police. The doctor's body was slumped against the door, and officers ran towards him shouting. "Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit," Celeste screamed. "He's going to be all right, right?" "No, he's not going to be all right. He's fucking dead. They fucking shot him." "They're going to want to talk to us, Celeste. Where's my shirt? I need to find my shirt." The next day, Celeste went back to work. We did our best not to talk about what had happened that night, but it was hard not to think about it as we saw the blood-stained concrete in front of the door every day. As best as the police could make out, Dr. Richards was attempting to break in to enact revenge on me. It seemed that he was blaming me for losing his job at the clinic and had been planning on teaching me a lesson. We did our best to put it behind us. Our lovemaking had come to a sudden crawl once Celeste had returned to work. I had just assumed it was due to the stress that comes with the hard work she did, but I didn't really mind. I was glad to have the opportunity to rest and recharge, and Celeste still woke every morning with a smile on her beautiful face. Her work was a drain on her, though, and she'd return sullen. She began to seem distant to me. Her attitude had started to shift. I wasn't sure if it was the incident with the doctor or the return to work. It could have been all of it. I had a new purpose in life now. I only wanted to make Celeste happy. While she was away, I cleaned and took care of the home. I prepared her meals and made sure she was as comfortable as possible. Nothing seemed to work, though. She'd often snap at me. "God, you're fucking pathetic. You know that, right?" she said one day when I surprised her with flowers one day as she walked through the door. She apologized later that evening as she mixed our nightly drink, a tradition she had started that I wasn't particularly fond of, but it had become the only time now that she would sit and chat with me and be kind. The only time we had together anymore that reminded me of our first night together at that Greek restaurant. Every night was a different drink, and she'd refer to herself as a mixologist. We'd sit and sip our drinks and chat. I rarely, if ever, enjoyed the drinks, but I learned quickly that she took great offense if I didn't finish them. We'd go to bed afterwards, where we no longer made love. The bed was only a place for sleeping now. She had gotten into some sort of trouble at the clinic and was placed on a work program. This meant that she had to start working the late-night shift. We became like ships passing in the night. I'd wake in the morning with the sun and work around the house quietly while she slept. She'd wake as the sun went down and get ready for work. The tradition of our daily drinks did not end. She still insisted on fixing one for me each night before she left. I was just thankful that the few hours that we spent with each other included a brief time of comfort and conversation. I'd have my drink and crawl into bed, and she would leave for work. We carried on like this for months. I woke one morning to a dull ache in my lump. I looked down to find that it had grown. The skin was blistered and red. I reached down to touch it, and the skin was hot and firm. I pulled myself from bed and fought off the pain with some ibuprofen. When Celeste woke up that evening, I asked her to take a look. "I think you must have just slept on it wrong. Or didn't you say you had switched the laundry detergent? It looks to me like an allergic reaction." "Allergic? To the detergent?" I asked. "It's super common. Don't worry about it," she said as she got dressed for her day. But the pain didn't subside. Every morning the lump grew. Bit by bit it grew until it was the size of a basketball protruding from my side. One morning when I woke up, there was a small tear in my skin on the lump. Small splotches of blood had stained the sheets. "You're perfectly fine," she'd assured me. I even asked some of the doctors at the clinic about your situation, and they all agree that this is just a general flare-up. It'll happen from time to time. "How can they know what it is? They haven't even seen it," I stammered. "We have your files at the clinic. They've all seen that. But it's so much bigger now." "I know. They know that too. I've shown them the pictures." My eyebrows shot up. "Pictures? What pictures?" "The pictures I took," she said with a tinge of annoyance. "What are you talking about, Celeste? I took a couple of photos of your lump when you were asleep. Don't make a big deal about it," she said with a scowl. "Celeste, why would you take pictures of it when I'm asleep?" This right here, this is why," she snapped. "You're such a goddamn baby about everything. You spent so long moping around the house after Dr. Richards bled out on our front porch." "That was a traumatic event," I snapped back. "You don't do well with stress, Colin. Maybe it's because you grew up as such a mama's boy. I don't fucking know." She screamed at me. She took a deep breath and grabbed my shoulders. "You're soft, Colin. It's part of why I love you, but it means you don't handle discomfort well. I know you feel shame around your lump. You shouldn't feel shame about it, but you do. Am I right?" I looked down at the floor. I was almost 6 inches taller than her, but in this moment I felt so small. "Yeah. You sleep like a rock. It takes an act of God to wake you up when you're dead asleep. I just figured I'd save you from some embarrassment by taking some quick pictures while you slept. It's not a big deal." "You could have asked," I said sheepishly. "Colin, you would have been so fucking embarrassed, and you know it. I'm only telling you about all of this now because you forced my hand. You know I love you, right?" She slipped her hand up to my chin and lifted my face to meet her gaze. I nodded as I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. I felt sick to my stomach. This was all too much to take in. I felt violated and betrayed by someone I loved. Was this love? Was this what it meant to be loved? She fixed me a drink as usual. Tonight's events were swimming through my mind as I was handed a drink. Something to do with a Russian donkey. She talked to me as I sipped on my drink. I tried to listen. I nodded my head as if I was listening, but I couldn't. My stomach churned over and over. I did my best not to let on how truly sick I felt. I knocked back the last of my drink in one swift motion. "I have to use the restroom," I blurted as I stood up and walked away. "Okay, go get him, lump," she said as I made my way down the hallway. I stumbled into the bathroom and quickly shut and locked the door behind me. I promptly fell to my knees and grabbed onto the sides of the toilet. My back arched as I evacuated my insides in a violent blast. It stank of the drink I had just forced down. I immediately felt better. I stood to my feet and wiped the vomit from the corners of my mouth. I flushed the toilet and watched as the vile concoction spiraled down. I walked back to the living room to find Celeste lounging on the couch, flipping through stations on the TV. "You have such a small bladder," she said with a chuckle. She turned her head back and caught a glimpse of me. She bolted upright. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. You're looking pale." "I'm just tired." I lied. I couldn't bring myself to tell her I couldn't keep her drink down or that I was upset with her. Even though I didn't trust her, she was so beautiful. I didn't want to cause her any sort of pain, and I definitely didn't want to say anything that would lead to another argument. "Are you feeling nauseous or anything?" she asked with what seemed like genuine concern. No, I just had a big day today with cleaning, and I think I didn't sleep great last night. No big deal. It's bedtime anyway, so I'm just gonna go to bed." "Get some good rest," she said after me as I made my way to the bedroom. My head hit the pillow and I drifted off to sleep. I had the most vivid nightmares of my life that night. I dreamt that there was a beautiful woman with a beautiful voice in love with an attractive man with an ugly voice. They had a long and loving conversation for what seemed like hours, all in soft whispers. "They can't keep us apart, my love. Come to me," the voice gurgled. "He's too stupid to know of our love. Tell me you love me. I love you, I love you, I love you." "Kill him," it hissed. "You know we can't do that." "Take me away." "You know that's not an option either, my love." "Take me away," it growled. The voice was horrible. I knew this dream was a nightmare, and I attempted to will myself awake to stop the horrendous voice from speaking. I blinked my eyes open ever so slightly. There in the pale light I could see Celeste, nude and kneeling down by the bed. She was gently caressing my lump and whispering to it too faintly for me to make sense of the words parting between her lips. I dared not move and lay as still as possible and pretended to sleep. I didn't know who this woman was, but it was not the Celeste I had fallen in love with back at Nico's. She stayed there by my side until the sun rose. She looked back over her shoulder towards the rising light and stood up. She dressed in her nurse scrubs and left. I lay there trying to make sense of the hellish night I had just experienced. Mother had given me bits and pieces of what it was like to have a partner, but she had certainly never described something like this. I crawled out of bed and made my way downstairs. I could hear Celeste in the kitchen moving dishes around. I walked in to find her making eggs. I cleared my throat as I took a seat at the kitchen table. "Celeste, last night." "Ugh, I can't right now, Colin. I had a long day at work, so whatever hypochondriac issue you have cooking in that brain of yours is just going to have to go on the back burner." "Rough day at work?" I asked, perplexed. "Yes, Colin. Not all of us got a ton of money from our dead mom. Some of us have to work for a living." "Celeste," she slammed her wooden spoon down on the counter. "For fuck's sake, Colin. I have been at work all night dealing with annoying patients faking illnesses for painkillers and creepy doctors staring at my ass all night. I just got home. I just want to eat and go the fuck to bed. Is that too much to fucking ask for?" Can you just shut the fuck up for a few fucking minutes and let me have some peace and goddamn quiet? She went back to stirring her eggs with the wooden spoon. I wouldn't speak another word. I stayed sitting at the table. She finished cooking her eggs and ate them in complete silence. She tossed her fork down onto the empty plate and went to bed. I sat there at the table for hours. I finally stood and went to clean the dried eggs off her plate and pan. As I stood there focusing on the warm water running across my hands, I tried to make sense of how Celeste spent all night whispering to my lump. Why was she lying about being at work all night? I looked up to see the liquor cabinet on the other end of the kitchen beckoning me to open it, beckoning me to peer inside for the first time since Celeste had claimed it for herself. I dried my hands and flung the doors open. Dozens and dozens of bottles lined the shelves, brown, green, clear, and yellow. I would have thought it looked pretty if I didn't already know how vile they tasted. I pulled the bottles out one by one to take a look at what they all were. I smelled each one in turn. Tequila, vodka, vermouth. Gin especially smelled foul. Then I came across a bottle I recognized. A small plastic orange bottle with a white cap, a child safety cap. It was my medicine. The medicine that Dr. Richards had given me was, but the prescription date was after I had stopped taking the drug. I picked up the bottle to take a closer look, and there, behind that bottle, was another. Behind that bottle was another. I found 6 bottles in total. Each was jammed with the pills, enough that had I continued to take them daily, I'd have enough for well over a year. Behind the bottles were 2 other troubling items. One was a bottle of some sort of medical liquid called midazolam. The other was a booklet of prescription papers that had previously belonged to Dr. Richards. I didn't understand. She said I was perfect the way I was. Why was she giving me the medicine that had been making my lump grow? Why did she have so much of it? So much that she had a prescription pad to order more. What was midazolam? I picked up my phone and dialed the Wellspring Clinic. Thank you for calling the Wellspring Clinic. Can you please give me your name and date of birth? Said a raspy-voiced woman on the other end. Her voice rattled with the sound of a lifetime of cigarettes. Hi, I'm Colin. I'm not a current patient. I just have a quick question I'm hoping you can help me out with. Sure, Colin, go ahead, said the smoky voice. My girlfriend actually works there. Well, she's been. Oh, a boyfriend is calling, she exclaimed. Then with a hushed tone, are you planning a surprise? Who is the lucky girl? Celeste, but what I wanted to ask is... No, I don't think so, she interrupted. Celeste doesn't work here. What do you mean she doesn't work there? Maybe you just don't know her. Number, I've been here for 22 years this last Tuesday. I know everyone who works here, and there aren't that many people to keep track of. It sounds like there is some confusion on your end, and I'm really sorry to have to be the one to break it to you. Celeste really should have been the one to tell you, but I can't say I'm too surprised. She hasn't worked here for 2 months now. She walked out and made a big stink about it. Threw brochures and papers all over the place, real big mess to clean up. That doesn't make sense. She's been going into work every night. Honey, I don't know where she's been going every night, but it certainly isn't the Wellspring Clinic. I don't understand. Sometimes life throws you a curveball, honey. She's a looker and she was a talented nurse, but something in her snapped. She just wasn't the same there at the end. Hope things get sorted out for you. You take care now, honey. And with that, the phone went dead. I was stunned. On the blind side of information slamming into me, I had completely forgotten to ask about the midazolam. "What's going on, my love lump?" I spun around on my heels. There stood Celeste in her nightgown. The satin fabric spilled across her breasts, barely containing her as she rubbed the sleep from her eyes. "What time is it?" she asked through a massive yawn. The clock on the oven showed 2:33. I had completely lost track of time, getting lost in my thoughts. This was much earlier than she usually woke up, though. "It's really early. Why are you up?" I managed to ask through a guilty gulp. "I just heard you talking to someone." She walked to a cupboard and started to make some coffee. "Phone?" "Yeah, just a wrong number." Sounded like a long phone call for a wrong number. Some pushy salesman calling the wrong number, couldn't take no for an answer is all, I said, staring down into the sink at the rest of the dishes I needed to finish up. She stood very still for a moment before letting out another big yawn. "Okay," she squeaked. "I hate those fuckers." She began to pour the grounds into the top of the coffee maker. "Why don't you go have a seat in the living room, lump? I'll fix my coffee up and I'll bring you your nightly drink. I think you'll like the surprise I've got lined up for you tonight. Don't you want to go back to sleep? It's still so early for you." "What's the point? I won't be able to get back to sleep anyway, and we can hang out for a couple of extra hours. Go have a seat and relax. I'll take care of Mommy's itty-bitty boy." She gently pushed me out of the kitchen and into the living room. "Sit, sit, sit." I plopped down onto the sofa. What in the world was going on? I reached down to hold my swollen lump, still the size of a basketball. What was her obsession, and what exactly was she putting in my drinks? She soon emerged from the kitchen with her coffee in one hand and a tall glass of brown liquid in the other. "Thought we'd just go for an easy classic for you tonight." She shoved the drink into my hand. "Whiskey on the rocks." She sat down across from me and leaned in close. She reached up and ran her fingers through my hair. "Drink up." I brought the drink slowly up to my lips and began to take a sip. She lifted her hand up to the bottom of the glass and tilted it back. The whiskey and whatever else was in there flooded into my mouth. I swallowed it down with a few gulps, and it burned the back of my throat and nose. This was by far the worst tasting drink she had given me, but I had managed to drink it down. "Good boy." She patted me on the head and took my glass. "I'm going to make breakfast real quick. You just lie here and relax." She made her way to the kitchen while looking back over her exposed shoulder at me with a smile. "I'll be right back." As soon as she left the view of the living room, I jumped to my feet and ran down the hallway to the bathroom. I assumed my position at the toilet and let loose a violent torrent of brown fire and mystery medicine. I hadn't eaten all day, so the contents of my stomach were almost empty save for the drink and bile. I flushed it down and ran back to the couch Celeste had left me at while wiping the corners of my mouth free of vomit for a second night in a row. I plopped down and did my best to appear comfortable. A moment later, Celeste came back in with a slice of toast and her coffee. She sat down across from me once again. "Wanna watch The Bachelor?" I nodded my head. "Sure." I couldn't tell you what happened on The Bachelor. Even when I wasn't in fear for my life, I couldn't stand the show. I only sat through it because Celeste loved it so much. I found every person on the show absolutely horrible, but she thought the show was hilarious. We made it through the episode when she looked over at me and furrowed her eyebrows. "Aren't you tired?" This was it. She was expecting me to be tired from the drink. I had to play along in order to try to piece together the puzzle of how she was spending her nights. I put my arms up high over my head and faked a yawn. "Oh, I am bushed," I said as I started rubbing my eyes. I really needed to sell the idea that I was tired. "I think I'll go get in bed early tonight." "Sounds good, lump." Sweet dreams. I brushed the vomit and whiskey out of my teeth and crawled into bed. Truthfully, I was tired. Whatever she had given me was making me feel drowsy even after having put most of it down into the sewers below. My eyelids grew heavy as I lay still beneath the warm, soft sheets. I couldn't lie there much longer pretending to be asleep before I actually fell asleep. The world grew dark and distant as I drifted off. I dreamt again that night. More whispering between two beautiful lovers. One with the voice of an angel and the other with the sounds of an injured animal that had learned to talk. "Did you bring it?" said the pained voice. "I bring it every night, love." "It's time. I just can't. Just do it already." It snarled Groot. I felt a pinch. I peeled my eyelids apart to find once again Celeste nude and kneeling next to the bed, rubbing my lump and whispering frantically. I watched her for a few minutes. If this were anything like the night before, she would continue on for hours and hours before ending her bizarre pastime. "Celeste?" I asked weakly through dry lips that stuck together as I said her name. Her whispering stopped immediately, and she slowly turned her head to look at me. "Celeste?" I licked my lips to moisten them. "What are you doing?" She moved her hands down as if to hide them and continued to stare at me. "Celeste, I called your work today. I know you're no longer working at the clinic. I know you've been spending the nights coming in here and talking to yourself. I don't know what's going on, but I am deeply worried about you." Nothing. It was as though there was nothing there. She stared back at me with the eyes of an empty person. "What are you hiding, Celeste?" Her gaze finally broke away from mine, and a look of shame spread across her face like wildfire. She handed me a small syringe. "Celeste, what is going on?" I whispered to her. With that, her nose crinkled and tears welled up in her eyes. She began weeping and placed her head down on my chest. My face was covered with her hair. I put my hand onto her head and gently caressed her hair. "Tell me what's wrong, Celeste. We can fix this. We can make things like they were once. We can get you help." I felt wet, a warm wetness. At first I thought it was her tears cascading down me, but it was so much. It was all over me. I reached my hand down out of sight to touch the wetness and brought it back up to see. My fingers were drenched in red. I grabbed Celeste by the shoulder and sat her up along with me. The sheets were covered in blood, I was covered in blood, and Celeste was covered in blood. There in Celeste's hand was a scalpel. "Celeste, no, why? Please don't do this. You have so much to live for." "I love you," I screamed. I grabbed the scalpel to rip it away from her. In doing so, I sliced deep into my left hand, but I had managed to throw the instrument across the room. I didn't care about my hand. I could fix that later, but for now. I needed to find where she had cut herself. I grabbed her arms to see where she had made the slices. It was difficult to maneuver my hand with a deep gash. I must have sliced through some tendons, but I had enough dexterity to lift her arms up and find nothing. "Where did you cut yourself, Celeste? Please tell me." I grabbed her head and started moving it around to see if she had cut her throat. Once again, nothing. All I could see was a perfectly healthy, beautiful woman covered in blood and weeping. I looked down, and that was when I saw it. I was the source of blood. A gash running across the lump had exposed the yellow and white of the fatty tissue beneath the skin. It ran the entire length of the lump, and it was clear that the growth was beginning to make its way out. "Celeste, why? Why did you do this?" I screamed. I took both my hands, and to the best of my ability, I attempted to hold the wound closed. Blood seeped from between the two flaps of skin. The wound looked awful, but I could barely feel it. Other than the wetness and warmth of the blood, there was almost no feeling at all. "We were supposed to be together," said Celeste as she plunged her hands between the folds of skin I was holding together. No pain, but an overwhelming sense of pressure swelled up within me. I could feel a tugging at my innards. I let go with one hand and punched her square in the nose. It broke with a deafening crack as she fell backwards. Her hands, along with some of my intestines, spilled out of me. I grabbed them as quickly as I could and frantically started to shove them back inside. Celeste leaped to her feet and lunged at me. I threw up my arms and managed to throw her down to the floor again. This short victory came at the cost of the intestines slipping out once more. This time they plopped down onto the floor with a sickening wet thud. I stood up, and the intestines spilled out more. I grabbed at them and tried to shove them back in with limited success. Celeste screamed incoherently. Her naked body writhed in the wetness, and her hair was a tangled, matted mess. Her eyes darted across the room to the scalpel on the floor. We both made a mad dash to be the first to get to it. There, our bodies entangled in a slippery mess on the floor. I held her face back with my limp hand. She bit into it deeply. I screamed out in pain, but I had a firm grip of the scalpel with the other hand. As she bit deeper and deeper into me, I swung the end of the blade upward into her throat. I swung the blade hard and deep over and over and over again. I kept swinging it after her body went limp and fell lifeless beside me. Panting, I stumbled to my feet and grabbed at my side in an attempt to hold the wound closed. It was clear that I needed to stop the bleeding as soon as I could. I grabbed a towel and held it tightly to the cut. I made my way over to the mirror to see what Celeste had done to me. There it was. A clean cut about a foot long going vertically down my side. At the bottom were my intestines hanging out and dragging on the floor behind me. I moved the balm towel to the side a bit more to get a better look at the cut. As the folds of skin separated, I could make out a pair of milky eyes. They blinked. I slowly peeled back the folds of skin and could make out more of a face. It was disgusting by any measure. Instead of a nose, it had only 2 shriveled holes. Its lips were pulled back so far that they were barely there, and behind them were its gums holding onto tiny chiclets of teeth. It had strands of hair falling across its brow in a wet mess, and its skin was mottled with vibrant reds, yellows, and sickening grays. It gasped for breath as if it had never tasted air before. With every breath it gulped down, I could feel my own lungs fill with a foul stench. I couldn't breathe. I had so many questions. Had this been in the entire time? Was this what Celeste wanted? What was I looking at? Most importantly, why was it so beautiful? Something about this thing was drawing me in. It called to me. I knew now what Mother meant when she talked about love at first sight. I knew the kind of love she described to me in fairy tales. I thought what I had felt for Celeste was love, but that paled in comparison to this. I pulled back at my skin and pushed from within to reveal as much as I could. There in my childhood bedroom, I held the face of my beloved. Its face would be the last thing I would see before I drifted off to sleep one last time. Although Celeste had brought my life to an end, she had taught me that in the end I could truly learn to love myself.